And tonight's headlines: a Sudanese man is being questioned on terrorism charges after arriving at Heathrow from America with bullets in his pockets. President Bush has unveiled an ambitious space program of a permanent moon base and a manned mission to Mars. And Tony Blair's chances of winning the day on tuition fees have been boosted after the Chancellor backed his plans. Nick, just what Tony Blair wanted.
Yes, just what he wanted, because frankly many Labour MPs have simply no stomach for another back me or sack me appeal from the Prime Minister. So the Chancellor's support is vital. Now frankly it shouldn't be news at all, the Chancellor backing government proposals, should it, John? But it is, because everyone here knows, the dogs on the street know, that Gordon Brown privately argued against the idea of pushing ahead with these reforms to Tony Blair, and therefore they noted and we noted very carefully in Prime Minister's questions today, when the Prime Minister spoke, just you look, there was the Chancellor nodding vigorously away.
That is a good deal for Britain's universities, and it is important that we spend this money in this way. And I have to say to him one other thing.
He addressed a group of MPs, Gordon Brown, later on. The work isn't over. Ministers say to me that now rebels are having to justify why they're opposed to tuition fees, rather than people justifying to them why they're in favour. But there are still many rebels. The battle ain't over yet.
Nick, how genuine is this sudden pals act between the Prime Minister and the Chancellor?
It's genuine. Both sides agree it's genuine. The question is why. The talk here is another deal done at another dinner. Will Gordon Brown now take over 2 years after the next election, say those who are interested in these sorts of deals? It's certainly true that one Blairite said to me, Gordon now knows that Tony isn't going, so he can't mess it up before the next election in hope of inheriting. A Brownite said to me he doesn't want to inherit a divided and disunited party. This act, the Blair and Brown Act, has taken the Labour Party to great places, and it's back on the road.
All right, thank you, Nick. Detectives hunting the killer of retired Lieutenant Colonel Riley Workman released a tape of what could be the voice of the killer. The colonel was gunned down on the doorstep of his Hertfordshire home a week ago. The tape was of a 999 call to an ambulance operator, but was made 9 hours after Mr. Riley was shot. Police hope it may jog the memory or prick the conscience of the villagers.
Hello, caller. Hello?
Hello?
The ambulance service. What's the address you want the ambulance to come to?
Ambulance? It's Hollyhouse Cottage.
In what town?
That's Phoenix, Pelham. That's near Buntingside.
The death of a mother at one of the country's top private hospitals has prompted an investigation into its maternity care. Laura Touche died because of the poor care she received from her midwife. Today, the Nursing and Midwifery Council struck off the midwife and ordered the investigation. The council revealed the Portland hospital had employed the midwife knowing she wasn't properly registered. Romilly Weeks reports.
Peter Touche has battled for 5 years to have the midwife whose errors led to the death of his wife held to account. Today, Grace Bartholomew was struck off the nursing register. She'd failed to give Laura Touche the most basic care after she'd had twins at the Portland hospital. As for the hospital, it had employed Miss Bartholomew knowing she wasn't fully qualified.
The decision by the NMC is an inevitable consequence of the lack of basic nursing care in the case of my late wife. I am astonished to learn from today that the Portland allocated someone of such qualifications to care for her and the twins post-operatively.
The Portland is a hospital that should have a red carpet outside its doors. Royals, footballers and film stars have all elected to have babies there. But tonight, the Nursing and Midwifery Council ruled that care standards at the hospital should be investigated.
The committee has decided, therefore, to instruct the registrar of the Nursing and Midwifery Council to establish with the local supervising authority responsible for the Portland Hospital that the necessary systems and standards are in place to comply with the standards laid down by the regulation of midwives by the council.
It costs around £6,000 to have a baby here at the Portland. For that, you get your own room and hotel-type comfort. But as Mr. Touche found out so tragically, 5 years ago, standards of care here fell well below what you'd expect at the most basic of NHS hospitals. The investigation could establish whether practices have improved since. ITV News in central London.
Welcome back. They promise us magic and sparkle in our Christmas shopping. That hasn't been reflected in Marks & Spencer's Christmas sales figures. Overall, they were down more than 2%. Bad news for M&S after they had been winning back customers in the ever more competitive high street. Here's our business editor, Caroline Kerr.
There was precious little to smile about at M&S today. For a year and a half, things were looking up at Britain's favourite department store. But now sales are falling, and the experts are concerned that Marks & Spencer is on the decline again.
Analysts became worried when Marks & Spencer started to reduce clothes in the run-up to Christmas. Today, their fears were justified when the company unveiled disappointing figures, particularly in the key sector of women's wear.
To be fair, Marks & Spencer is not the only fashion retailer which struggled. They were all up against unseasonably good weather.
It was a very tough time for the clothing sector. Fashion suffered in the run-up to Christmas because of the very strong warm autumn. People put off buying clothes until the sale period. Of course, when there were losers, there were also winners, and one of the big winners in the run-up to Christmas was the electronics and digital sector.
The popularity of electronic gadgets meant that among this year's winners were Dixons. Today, they unveiled sales figures up by 4% on last year. The supermarket chains like Tesco's and Morrison's did well too. But Marks & Spencer topped the list of losers. Their sales figures were down by more than 2%. Other big names like House of Fraser and W.H. Smith also reported disappointing sales. The long-term threat to all the high street losers, of course, comes from the supermarkets. As they become the new department stores, they challenge the traditional chains.
If you think back to where your grandmother used to buy her Christmas gifts 30, 40 years ago, shops like Marks & Spencer's, Boots, W.H. Smith, Woolworths, maybe even Sainsbury. Those are the guys who are losing out.
Modern consumers demand value, fashion and constant innovation. The challenge for the established names on the high street is to prove they can keep up. Caroline Kerr, ITV News.
Maxine Carr won't be released from jail early. She'd applied to be freed under the electronic tagging system, but that prompted the Home Office to change the rules. Ministers say the decision to tag her can't be left to her prison governor. An inquiry into the death of the serial killer Harold Shipman began today at Wakefield Jail, where he hanged himself. His widow, Primrose, is expected to talk to the prison ombudsman, who's trying to establish Shipman's state of mind. And American record producer Damon Dash has been accused in court papers of raping a former model. The hip-hop star produced Victoria Beckham's latest single. A spokeswoman for Dash says the allegations are ludicrous. There certainly is life for Manchester City after David Seaman, who retired yesterday. They're through to the fourth round of the FA Cup after beating Leicester 3-1 tonight. Seaman was gone, but not forgotten, as Jim Spencer reports.
Manchester City hadn't won a game in 14 matches and, like Leicester, find themselves struggling at the bottom of the Premiership. Success in the FA Cup, now a crucial factor in both their seasons. Kevin Keegan did have some good news for his side today. The signing of England goalkeeper David James, softening the blow of David Seaman's retirement. And it seemed to give his side a lift. 11 minutes into the match, and Antoine Sibieski with a perfectly timed header to put Manchester a goal up. After the break, Leicester found their feet. A free kick from Les Ferdinand getting a friendly rebound off the wall to level the scores. But this being the FA Cup, and the improbable always happens. A mistake by Leicester defender Frank Sinclair after a throw-in, and Nicolas Anelka was allowed to pounce. His goal dedicated to David Seaman. Then in the final moments of the match, John Macken added a third to see Manchester City into the FA Cup fourth round. Final score, Leicester 1, Manchester City 3. Jim Spencer, ITV News.
Two other games were played tonight. Chelsea beat Watford 4-0 and Southend lost to Scarborough 1-0. So tonight's results mean Manchester City will play Tottenham in the fourth round and non-league Scarborough play host to Chelsea's international stars. I'll be back in a few minutes with a reminder of tonight's headlines. First, we join our ITV colleagues in newsrooms around the country to bring you your news.
Good evening, I'm Keir Simmons. These are the headlines in London tonight. A vigil's been held for peace campaigner Tom Hurndall, who lost his fight for life. Tom, who was from North London, had been in a coma for 9 months after being shot by an Israeli soldier in the Gaza Strip while trying to protect a Palestinian child. His family say they want the soldier who fired the fatal shot tried for murder. Haig Gordon reports.
Friends and family mounting their vigil tonight outside Downing Street, not just reminding us how the young peace campaigner died from an Israeli army bullet to the head, but also highlighting their wish for justice. Last year, when Tom Hurndall was preparing to leave his Kentish town home for the Middle East, London Tonight was there to talk to him.
I think everyone really knows what they're getting themselves into, who's going over there. Everyone, there are no suicidal kind of people going over, they all know what they're getting themselves into.
But while trying to shield Palestinian children in Gaza, he was caught in gunfire. He was brought home, but his condition was such that he was highly vulnerable to infection, and he finally succumbed to pneumonia. An Israeli soldier has been arrested and indicted, but his family and their supporters are anxious to ensure that the charge should be murder and not manslaughter.
What needs to happen, I think, is that the soldier needs to be prosecuted in a way that he would be, for example, in this country. If the soldier had carried out murder against a civilian, that he'd be prosecuted with a full weight of the law.
This is what the Israeli ambassador had to say today.
I send my sincere condolences and sympathy to the family, to his friend, and I do hope and assure them that we are determined not to rest until justice will be served.
And the Foreign Office said today they were encouraged by progress in their negotiations with the Israeli authorities. This is Haig Gordon for London Tonight.
Thousands of commuters faced big delays this evening when power was cut from 7 platforms at Waterloo Station. Rail staff were forced to switch the supply off after passengers got off a broken-down train and walked along the track. A woman who was left blind in one eye by an attack in a doctor's waiting room has been speaking about her ordeal. Sarah Seago was repeatedly punched in the face during an assault by a fellow patient in Barking. Detectives say the assault on the 22-year-old mother was racially motivated. Desmond Tutu, the former Archbishop of Cape Town, returned to King's College London to mark the 175th anniversary of his old university. The Nobel Peace Prize winner, who studied at the university in the 1960s, joins the college as a visiting professor in post-conflict studies. He began his new post today by leading start-of-term prayers at the university's chapel on the Strand.
You get very, very nostalgic, yeah. I mean, it's about 40 years or so ago. And it's just wonderful to be back. Great privilege and honor to be asked to preach.
The Athens Olympics are giving impetus to the latest phase of a long campaign to return the Elgin marbles to Greece. The ancient sculptures were installed at the British Museum in Bloomsbury soon after being brought back to Britain in the early 19th century. The museum refuses to hand them back, questioning whether they'd be looked after properly. Phil Bales reports.
Since the Greeks lost their marbles, they've been unhappy. Not little glass balls or credit cards, but precious sculptures which adorned the Parthenon in Athens for 2,000 years, until the British ambassador there took half of them and brought them to London 2 centuries ago. Now a group, including a former foreign secretary, wants the marbles reunited in time for the return of the Olympics to Greece.
Suppose somebody had hacked the Nelson column in two, and the head was somewhere else, and we were left with the stomach and the legs of the great admiral. We wouldn't rest until the statue was back as a whole, and that's exactly the position of these marbles.
Lord Elgin claimed that by bringing these here, he saved them, while it said that the Greeks allowed their half to rot from pollution. Now they promise to look after all of them in a special museum.
The British Museum say these beautiful figures are legally theirs, bought in 1816 with money voted for by Parliament. They also say that more people can see them here, 4.6 million a year, more than in Athens.
There's a real misunderstanding about what going back to where they were in the first place means, because for a start, half of the sculptures were destroyed a very long time ago. So of the remaining 50% that are in existence, half of them are already in Athens, and the other half are dispersed around Europe, some of which are in London, some are in Paris, some are in Palermo, and so on.
A poll shows 8 out of 10 say the marbles should be allowed to go home, but some aren't sure where.
Is it Egypt or Greece?
Greece.
Greece,
yeah.
Greece, okay.
Yes. I think they should belong back where they came from.
But the Rafia's museums will be emptied if other countries say, we want our mummies back. At the British Museum, this is Phil Bales for London Tonight.
And finally, charity marathon runner Lloyd Scott has revealed details of his latest fundraising stunt. The former Essex fireman is planning to cross Australia on a penny farthing. Lloyd, who famously completed the London and New York marathons dressed in an antique diving suit, says the challenge will put his cycling skills to the test.
It only turned up the weekend, I put it together, and so this has been my sort of first ride, so very, very wobbly. The thought of like 2,600 miles is quite daunting at the moment.
And that's all from us for now. We're back with bulletins during GMTV from 6:30 tomorrow morning. But now it's back to the ITV News and John Souchet.
And that's News at 10. You can see President Bush's full speech on his dream of manned missions to Mars on the ITV News channel. From the News at 10 team, good night.
ITV National Weather, sponsored by Powergen.
Hello there once again, where the rain, sleet and snow is now cleared off eastwards into the continent, leaving clear slots, touches of frost and icy patches on our roads to watch out for, especially where we caught that sleet and snow during today. Do watch out for these, extra care is always needed. Some wintry showers around in Scotland on the higher ground there, and then cloud and rain into the southwest later. So starting with the south tomorrow, plenty of cloud, miserable overcast, plenty of rain, some of it hefty, brightness of premium, and even sleet and snow on the higher ground, the Welsh Mountains, for instance, and the Pennines. Moving further north all the while, the best of the brightness tomorrow in eastern Scotland. To the west, 1 or 2 wintry showers on the higher ground, ditto the south. With our temperatures, these are the sorts of values we can expect. Aberystwyth seeing 8 or 46.
Positive energy from Powergen.